So we're going to move from the northwest to the northeast now, in a little bit different kind of atlas. So this project is made possible by, but not necessarily the official position of, the Center for Ethics in Society at St. Anselm College. They're the sort of lead on the project. New Hampshire Housing and the Business and Economic Affairs Division in New Hampshire. So this project is part of a national effort. It's the main project for Sarah Bronin out of Cornell University. Her aim is to create a national zoning atlas. And to paraphrase from the national site, the National Zoning Atlas aims to enable comparisons across jurisdictions, illuminate regional and statewide trends, and strengthen national planning for housing production, transportation infrastructure, and climate response. The atlas could also democratize zoning information and thus participation in land use decisions, inform zoning reform advocacy, and narrow a wide information gap that currently favors land speculators, institutional investors, and homeowners over socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. So the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas is actually the third atlas completed in this statewide effort. And as you can see on the map, there's several other states in progress. So how do we create the zoning atlas? Well, thankfully we have a team of interns that tirelessly read through 23,000 pages of zoning codes, subdivision and site plan ordinances, and of course looked at zoning maps. They gathered data through that was current as of June 1st, 2022. We had to have a set date because zoning is always changing. New Hampshire is sort of unique in that most law changes happen on town meeting day. So we had that luxury of having sort of a bulk of things that happen all at once. And within the state of New Hampshire, there's 269 jurisdictions. And within those, that's 2,139 zoning districts. So the interns gathered information on basic things like, is it residential use primarily, or is it non-residential? For the residential, is it one family, two family, 3, 4, 5 plus family? Is it affordable housing, accessory dwelling units regulations, manufactured housing regulations? And then within that, dimensional requirements. What's the minimum lot size? What's the minimum setbacks required? How much lot coverage can you have? Height restrictions, and more. And parking requirements is a big thing that can impact development. And so taking all that together, among all those jurisdictions, they ended up populating over 400,000 data fields in this monster spreadsheet. Now, while that was happening, in parallel, the GIS side, which I was the lead for, I had 2 interns. The other side had 6, but whatever. And only one of them actually did much work, so go Alyssa. So they were gathering shapefiles, geodatabases from regional planning commissions, municipalities, and in New Hampshire, there's actually a consulting firm that had created the zoning layers for many of the jurisdictions, and they didn't want to just give it to us, so we had to purchase it, and then had to do a lot of cleaning. And then, about a third of the state we just couldn't get data for, so we had to digitize it. Pulling the PDF maps out of the online zoning codes, finding scan maps in old, like 1980 zoning codes, screen captures from online mappers. The data obviously exists, but they didn't want to release it to us. And even going to town hall, taking a photo of the map, and nothing like georeferencing a map that is taken from an off-angle picture and has waves in it. And needless to say, the zoning boundaries in the atlas are not precise, but at the scale we're looking at, it works. So as I said earlier, lots of cleaning required once we had all this data. The first thing, there's a lot of mismatched abbreviations. The zoning, the shapefile, it's R2, and in the database, it's R-2, and things like that. So things have to be able to merge together. Overlaps and slivers, not just where two towns meet, but even within the data we received for a town. Duplicate geometries, this happened a lot. We'll get data from a regional planning commission, we'll get data from a county and a town, and now we've got three different things all stacked on top of each other. Overlay districts, I'm not sure how familiar people are with zoning, but typically you have base districts, and then a lot of municipalities also have overlays, which have different requirements based on maybe historic areas or flooding or things like that, and we have to embed that information into the underlying data, and then of course joining our spatial data with that 400,000 point spreadsheet. There's mismatches. It's an iterative process to make sure everything works. And then, but when it's done, you finally have a statewide zoning layer. At the most basic level, we coded it by primarily residential districts, mixed-use districts, primarily commercial, conservation and agriculture, and then non-developable. But we weren't quite done yet. Then we had to go through and clip out more of the non-developable. So what that was permanently protected lands. Much of northern New Hampshire is the White Mountain National Forest. You can't build there. And then also wetlands and water areas of 10 acres or more. We use that as sort of a cutoff to say there's no way anyone's going to build here. A small little wetland, maybe they could get a permit to fill it in and build, but a 10-acre wetland, that's not likely going to happen. So now we can actually do some analysis. So at the most basic level, where can you build a single-family home in the state of New Hampshire? And not surprisingly, the majority of zoning code allows for a single-family home. In this case, actually 90% of the state allows it by right. Another 6% if you have a special permit, and only 4% is prohibited. And just as a size, for those who work in big numbers, this is 3.6 million buildable acres in theory in the state of New Hampshire. Now that doesn't account for what's already built. That's just permitted. 5+ family, not as available. About 44% of the buildable area of the state is permitted for multifamily 5+ housing, with another 9% available if it's age or income restricted. And then, a big thing that we're interested in is affordability. So, where can I build my starter home? And so we wanted to look at where can you build a single-family home on a lot that's less than an acre and they require less than 200 feet of frontage. Turns out only about 16% of the state can you do that, which was shockingly small. My first house in New York was on a third of an acre. My current house is on less than half an acre. So to see only 16% of the house where you're allowed to build on less than an acre, it was a little shocking. And that number, just 96% versus 16%, most people can see that difference in their head, but the maps, really show that stark contrast, and got people talking about, wow, there's clearly an issue here. Another affordability issue is accessory dwelling units, ADUs. These are typically built, to have the in-laws, be able to live at your house, or, you have a college student who hasn't found a job yet, but they don't want to live in the house. Some people use them for other non-family people, but a lot of people use them for family. And in the state of New Hampshire, it's required to allow attached ADUs in all zoning districts, but there's not a lot of regulation on anything beyond that. And so this map is showing that, by right, you can have an ADU with less than 2 parking spaces in only 42% of the state of New Hampshire. Most of New Hampshire, the yellow, requires 2 or more parking spaces for an ADU, and or you have to go through a public hearing process to get one, which is difficult for some people. And some places in the state, in those bright pink, require 3 or 4 parking spaces. Keep in mind, ADUs are frequently occupied by one individual, and that's 3 or 4 parking spaces in addition to whatever parking is required for the primary residence. So that's an issue. So we have all this data. We want to get it out to the public. We want them to be able to see it and understand it. And so, the team was grappling with, well, we're going to create a website and we'll have findings. I said, well, there's this StoryMap thing that works really nicely. Maybe we could use one of those. So they agreed with that, but they didn't want to call it a story map because they didn't think people knew what a story map was. So visual summary is what they went with, which is fine. So here's the story map, and it goes through the background of the project, some brief methodology with a link to more detailed methodology, our key findings, some of which I showed already. There's a ribbon across the top, so you can jump to different sections of the story map. And then after you get through the key findings, there's an option to look at additional findings. You can, tab through, look at the different findings for like 2, 3, 4 family. Or if you want to skip that, you can just keep scrolling, go past that. We did a sort of a case study for Manchester and the surrounding area, looking at what's already built, and looking at what's of it. After that, there's like 4% of the area available for housing. And then we have the interactive map embedded within the story map. The user can click on that. They get information about the jurisdiction. They can tab over, get information about the individual zoning district. Then conclusions, next steps, links to other things, and of course the credits at the end. So after they've run through and learned about the state of zoning in New Hampshire, then it's time for them to be able to do some exploration on their own. And before that, we decided, well, we should have a tutorial for how to use this zoning atlas. And at first it was like, well, we'll make a video and I'll click through and narrate it as I go. Partly I just didn't want to do that because I've done it before and it's awkward. But also I thought it might be more accessible to do it in, a story map format. So did a bunch of screenshots of the atlas, and then using like map choreography and some Photoshop, sort of walk through the different sections of the atlas viewer, highlighting the different pieces, description on how it works. And then, okay, now you've learned how to use it. Now it's, maybe a little bit more understandable. Now, click this link and we'll go to the Atlas Viewer. So here's the Atlas Viewer. It was built in Experience Builder. The user can search by jurisdiction. They can search by like a street address. Then on the left, and it'll zoom to those things. On the left, you have these toggles for 1 through 5+ family. You click on one of those toggles, the map changes and shows you where where you can build, in this case, a 5+ family unit. Then we have additional toggles. So as I mentioned, New Hampshire requires municipalities to allow for attached ADUs. Well, what about detached ADUs? And we can click on that toggle and it'll show you, here's in the state where you can have a detached ADU. After that, we have age-restricted housing. So that's, you can build multifamily, but only if it's age-restricted. And again, we click on that, it'll zoom to those few districts where that's the case. New Hampshire actually just changed their law that if you require it to be age-restricted, you also have to require it to be affordable. We have those as separate tabs now, so in phase 2, we're gonna have to combine those. But again, just a way to sort of quickly visualize where those things are. Manufactured housing is sort of like a naturally occurring, affordable housing option, and so you can see, where are those allowed in lots only. Maybe I want to see where they're allowed on individual lots only, and you can do that. And then sort of the fun part of the interactive atlas, if you will, you can do your own sort of queries, and so like, where can I build a house on a single family, on a 1-acre lot? And you can do that, click on the map, and that shows you, where can you do the 1-acre zoning. Now, on the flip side, are there places in the state that require, stupidly large lots? See, the opinions are my own. So, 10 acres or more to build a single family house. And we look at that, and oh yeah, there are districts across the state that you have to have at least 10 acres to build your house. And then we have the same thing for 2 family and 5+ family. We didn't include 3 and 4, partly because it's very similar to the 5+, and also there's only so much screen real estate you have here. So just a quick back, behind the curtains shot. This is Experience Builder. I won't get into the details of how it works. I was originally going to build this in like, Instant Apps or Web App Builder. Well, of course, Web App Builder's dead now, but quickly realized that this was going to be a much bigger deal. So I had to learn Experience Builder quickly. There's still a lot to learn, and in phase 2, I'm going to, probably do more with it. So after all that, we launch in May. And we had a big, press event. They launched a website, nhzoningatlas.org. I'll put that up again at the end. There was a lot of press coverage, both at the, right at the launch, because we did pre-briefing with the press so they knew what was coming. And then, lots and lots of coverage afterwards. Invited to regional planning commissions and towns to say, well, how does our, municipality fit in with this? And so we, created some zoomed in maps so they can see how their town compares to the county, how the county compares to the state, et cetera. And then, as a result of this, there's now possible legislative changes being talked about in New Hampshire, ADU reform, manufactured housing, et cetera. But the most important thing is, it's creating dialogue at the state level and the local level. And the local level is important because changes can and should occur at the local level. New Hampshire's the live-free state. They don't want state government telling them what to do. Plus, the state government's huge. 400 members in the New Hampshire House of, it's the third largest legislative body in the world, behind only the UK House of Commons and the United States House. And it's right now divided almost evenly 50-50, so you can imagine it's hard to get things through. So thank you for your attention. Almost everything I just presented is at the nhzoningatlas.org website. Explore the story map, explore the atlas. If you want to get in touch with me, there's my information, or you can find me on Slack. Thanks. Time for a question.
Time for one, maybe two questions. Go ahead.
This was very impressive. How well are you integrating in with this national zoning atlas?
So all of our data is up, well, most of the data has been uploaded to the National Zoning Atlas, and then they still have not gone live with their map, but once they do, you'll be able to query how New Hampshire compares to other states. Right now it's just the 3 states, but I know Massachusetts will be up there very soon because I'm working on that one as well. But the idea is you'll be able to compare, region to region, state to state, et cetera.
All right, one more question. Go ahead.
Are any of the states collaborating with each other on these efforts, specifically in getting the data, digitizing the data, and putting it up there? Are you in communication? I know you just mentioned Massachusetts, but this is such a huge effort. It seems like it'd be great if there were some lessons learned that others could utilize. Yes,
the New Hampshire team has been working with other states informally. We had a meeting with Rhode Island to give them some tips and tricks and things like that. And it is a collaborative effort. The state teams do have meetings with the national team and talk to each other. There's not pooled resources at the moment. We tried to get some funding to have the New Hampshire team help the other New England states, and that fell through, unfortunately. But we are at least giving them, moral support and some guidance. But actual labor, right at the moment, is just state by state, unfortunately.
All right. Thank you very much, Rick.